Welcome back, guys. By now, you guys might have experienced OEM to its full potential. We have seen a lot of activities and the power of Oracle Enterprise Manager as to how to manage a complete environment. But guys, the Oracle Enterprise Manager can also help you configure a physical standby where you don't have to worry about the manual method and the steps of configuring the standby. You and I personally know how much it costs when it comes to configuring a physical standby in a normal environment via manual method. Think about it. What if OEM automates the physical standby configuration for you? It becomes so simple. OEM is so powerful that it can actually configure a physical standby for you. In this project, we will be looking at configuring a physical standby for one server from Linux to Linux. Let's go on to the system. We are back onto the system, guys. I am logged into the Oracle Enterprise Manager. This is a completely new setup. Now over here I have only one target. If you look at, like, I have this OEM server, I have this dev database that is running on a dev server. Let us look at the database status, pmon. We can see that dev database is up and running. And also, guys, this dev database is already added as a target to this Oracle Enterprise Manager. There are no other targets onto this OEM setup. I can just type dev, hit enter. You can see the dev server, the agent, listener, Oracle Home, the database instance, all are already added as target to this OEM setup. Our goal is to create a standby database for this dev server on this standby server. So this is a new standby server that we are going to configure as a physical standby to the dev database running on the dev server. Even before we can configure the standby, there are some prerequisites that we need to follow. The first thing is we need to add the standby server to our Oracle Enterprise Manager because Oracle Enterprise Manager does not recognize that server. In order for us to perform the physical standby configuration using Oracle Enterprise Manager, we got to have the server on this Oracle Enterprise Manager target list. If we don't have that server on this target list, we cannot configure the physical standby. Pretty straightforward. Our first step in order to configure physical standby for the dev server would be to add this standby server as a target to the Oracle Enterprise Manager. So to start with, the first thing is we need to edit the etc host file on all the servers so that all the three servers know about each other. I'll start with the OEM server. I'll exit from the Oracle user. Let's open the etc host file. Let's go to the end of the file and we'll add this standby server 168.1.175. That's the IP address of the standby server. stb.dbgenesis.com stb. And guys, as I mentioned earlier, you don't need to add these details in case if you have a DNS server configured. Already these things will be taken care by the DNS server. In our environment, like in our practice, we don't have a DNS server, so we are doing it by ourselves. Let's get over here. Now I can see that dev server and OEM details are already added. I need to just add the details of the standby server. 168.1.175. This is the stb dbgenesis.com stb, save and close. That's done. On the standby server, open the etc host file. I think over here we need to add the details of both the OEM server and the dev server. So for OEM server 192.168.1.171 oem.dbagenesis.com, OEM, and then 192.168.1.172, that is the dev server, tbagenesis.com. I think that's correct spelling. Dev, save and close. First step is done. The next step is we need to install some binaries on this standby server even before we can add this server as a target into the OEM server. So let us go to our support website, and what you can do is, let's go to Oracle Enterprise Manager, add Linux target, select this article. In this one we can see that add OEM server details to etc host file, which is already done. We don't need to perform this pre-install because guys, what I've done is on this standby server we already have the Oracle installed, and what I've done is the Oracle home is same as the dev server. So on the dev server where we have this dev database up and running, the Oracle home is exactly same on the server, but the only difference is on this server there is no database running. You can see, ps-ef grep vmon, no database has been configured. We have only installed the Oracle software, the Oracle 12c software. So we have the Oracle 12c software and database running on the dev server, but over here we have only installed the Oracle home, no database configured. We will be configuring a physical standby from Oracle Enterprise Manager. So we don't need to run this one because I have already done it. And these packages are important. I mean, you got to install them on any server that you want to add as a target to the Oracle Enterprise Manager. Awesome guys, the packages are installed. Next, what we need to do, we need to create this agent directory that will host, or that will host the OEM agent. So what I'll do is I'll switch to the Oracle user and create this directory via the Oracle user. Also what I'll do is I'll just add this directory to the bash profile so that it's available whenever we need it. I think I'll just copy it from the bash profile over here, export agent home. This is the agent home location. I'll save this bash profile. We'll execute this once and that's it. Now we are ready to add this standby server to Oracle Enterprise Manager. Let's get into setup, add target, add targets manually. We'll go with install agent on host. Alright, we need to add the target server. So we'll give the dev server details, the standby server details, stb.dbagenesis.com, and platform would be Linux x86-64. Click on next. Now give the installation base directory as the agent directory. Delete this one, not required. I'll just delete all this. So U01 app Oracle agent is what our agent directory is. If you want to cross verify, you can see we just created the same directory. So that would be agent base directory. This instance directory would be populating automatically. Name credentials, we know that it is the credentials for the user that owns the Oracle software. So Oracle user is the one that owns the Oracle installation. Give the Oracle user password. This is for the standby server. And run privilege, I think nothing for now. Save as, always give a meaningful name. So this is stb, that's standby underscore Oracle underscore user, right? Click on OK. Also what I'll do is I'll add the root user because I know the credentials. So give the root user ID and password. Root. All right, run privilege, I think it won't be applicable. Save as stb underscore root underscore user. Click on OK. Done. This one privilege delegation not required, delete it. Port number default, click on next. Make sure everything is fine. Click on deploy agent. So what we are doing right now is, guys, we are adding the standby server to Oracle Enterprise Manager. If you don't add the standby server to OEM, you cannot configure the physical standby via OEM. You will have to configure it manually though. We are done. The standby server agent deployment is done. Let's click on done. Now guys, if we go to targets, let's go to all targets. I'll show you something important. Let's delete this one. All right, yeah, we have the STB server, right? We can see that the Oracle home discovered over here is the agent home, right? And the host is discovered, the agent software is discovered. Now, if we want to discover an existing Oracle database or listener, what we used to do, we used to go to setup, add targets manually, and then we used to use this add using guided process. Now the biggest problem over here is on this particular server, the standby server, we don't have a database or a listener running. So even if you go via this method, you won't be able to add or identify the Oracle home which is installed on this server. So let me show you. So we have this Oracle home, right? So $oracle_homes, cd $oracle_home and just do ls. Can you see Oracle 12c software is already installed, but in our enterprise manager, if we look at the discovered targets, we can only see that the host, the agent, and the agent home are discovered by the Oracle Enterprise Manager. Also, if I want to discover the Oracle home which is already installed, we cannot do it via this method because there is no listener or database running. That means if we cannot discover the Oracle home which is already installed, you cannot perform the standby setup. Now the challenge that we have is, how do you tell OEM that Oracle home already exists on the particular standby server? What we do is we go to setup, go to add targets, and we click this option called as configure auto discovery. Now when you're under this auto discovery, click on this option, advanced discovery modules. We want to discover an Oracle home which is already installed on a target server. Click on this option, Oracle home discovery. Now this will allow you to select on which server do you want to discover. I want to discover on the standby server. Select the standby server and this should be listed over here. Click on this option, STB server, click on OK. Now what OEM will do is, it will try to discover the Oracle home which is installed on the standby server. So we'll have to go to setup, go to add target, and we have to choose this option, auto discovery results, because right now we have started the auto discovery or we configure the auto discovery, but to see the results we have to go into auto discovery results, and next we have to come to this option called as targets on the hosts. Now you won't see any result, then just refresh and wait for some time and OEM will be able to discover the Oracle home on the standby server. So guys, we waited for a long time, but we still don't see that OEM is able to discover the Oracle home on the standby server. That's perfectly normal, and it does happen in real time also, that OEM is not able to identify the Oracle home that is installed on the standby server. What can you do? We'll try to click on refresh once again just in case it is able to identify, but we still see that OEM is not able to identify the Oracle home. What is the next step? How do we tell OEM that we have an Oracle home installed on the standby server? Let us go to setup, click on add target. Let's go to add targets manually. And then at this point you select the third option. We want to declare that there is Oracle software that is installed. Click on this option it will allow you to check on which host do you want to discover. We want to discover on the standby host. Select, and target type, just type Oracle, and then you should be able to find Oracle Home. We want to discover Oracle Home, right? Click on add. Now OEM will ask you a couple of questions. What name do you want to give to this target? So Oracle 12c underscore home, you can type any name, and then I will give the standby server details, stb.dbagenesis.com. So this is Oracle 12c home on the standby server. Next, guys, there are a lot of options, but you focus only on the star ones. Over here it is saying that for Oracle Home type O. I'll just type O. Path to Oracle Home, I will go to the standby server, and then over here we have the Oracle Home location. I'll just copy it. That's it. You need to provide only 3 details. Click on OK, and now OEM knows that there is one Oracle Home. Can you see added Oracle Home, Oracle 12c home on the standby server? Click on close, and let's go to all targets. Over here, if you search with STB, can you see we have now 2 Oracle Homes. One is for the agent home and the other one is the actual Oracle Home. That means on the standby server, we have discovered the host, the agent, the host home, and the Oracle Home that is already installed. So our standby server is ready. But even before we can continue to configure the standby for our dev server, there is one step that is important. So guys, whenever you discover a target which is like not having a database instance or a listener, the problem is the agent software that is installed on this particular host will not have a important plugin. If you don't have that plugin installed for the respective agent on this particular target, so we won't be able to configure the standby. What we need to do is, because while discovering this target, we did not have an Oracle instance, we did not have a listener. So OEM is smart enough. What OEM thought that this particular host, the standby, will not be used for installing Oracle. So what it did is it installed the agent software without database plugin. Our next step is to first install the database plugin on this particular agent, so that in future when we are creating the standby on this server, the database plugin will pick up the database instance, and that will allow OEM to manage the database instance via the agent. So how do we add the plugin? Go to setup, go to extensibility, click on plugins. Now from the list of plugins, we want to deploy the database plugin. Click on this option, select this Oracle database plugin, right? Go to deploy on, and we need to deploy it onto an agent, because the agent that we have installed, OEM did not add this plugin. The reason is there was no database instance running, there was no listener running. So OEM thought that we will never be installing the Oracle database on this standby target. But we have to add this plugin, otherwise we won't be able to manage or create the standby. Click on management agent. Now this will just tell you deploy plugin on management agent. So go with the latest plugin version, whichever it is. Click on continue. This will ask you where do you want to deploy. Now by default it has selected the standby host, because on this, the agent that is installed on this server, it is not having the database plugin. So we'll just continue, and this will just tell you prerequisite check. Click on next, and then just select deploy. Now you can click on show status to look at the deployment status. It will take a little time, guys. You can click on refresh to look at the status over here. Also you can check the status over here. It says running, deploying. Done, guys. So this took a while, but you can see all these statuses are green. This one is green. So we have deployed the database plugin onto the standby server. Let us recap, guys, what all we have done. So we had this dev server where dev database is running, and for this database we are about to configure a physical standby onto a new server, that is stb.dbagenesis.com, that is acting as our standby server. On this standby server we have the same Oracle home location where Oracle 12c binaries are already installed, but no database has been created. What we have done is we have added this standby server to OEM for monitoring purpose by deploying the agent. After deploying the agent, we had to discover the Oracle 12c home manually, because in the auto discovery results it was not able to discover this Oracle home. That's perfectly fine. After discovering the Oracle 12c home, we had to deploy the database plugin onto this agent, so that in future, like whenever we are configuring the physical standby, we want the agent to be able to monitor the database. So to monitor a database, we got to install the database plugin. This database plugin deployment, this one step we had to do, because while we were installing the agent software on this particular host, there was no database or no listener up and running. So that's why OEM thought that we are not going to host any database. That being said, we are now ready to set up the physical standby for our dev database. Let us move on. We will search for the dev database. The database instance dev is up and running. Let us click on dev. All right, so now go to availability and choose this option, add standby database. We are going to add the physical standby to the dev database, which will be running on the standby server. Now first we have to give the database login credentials. I will give the login credentials for the dev database sysdba user, right? So let me give the sys password. The role would be sysdba, save as. Definitely we want to save it as dev_sys_user, so that defines that it is the sys user. We will save it as preferred credentials sysdba. Click on login. Awesome. So we are in the create standby wizard. We have to select the first option, create a new physical standby database. Click on continue. Over here the wizard will allow you to choose whether you want to create the standby from the active database that is currently up and running, or do you want to use an existing backup. I don't have backup for the dev database. I'll be using the live database, that is, I want OEM to perform cloning from the actively running database, right? So we'll go with the online backup option. Click on next. On this screen, you can see the details. Primary database is dev, primary host is dev.dbagenesis.com. The primary database files will be copied directly to the standby database Oracle home. No staging areas are required. That means it's a direct copy. The degree of parallelism, do you want to speed up, reduce, depends on the size of the database. Right now it's a test database. I think 2 degree of parallelism is enough. That means admin will be allocating 2 channels. That's perfectly fine. Primary host credentials, like you guys already know, because in my environment I have already saved the credentials dev_oracle user. Name credentials by default always means the user which owns the Oracle installation. So dev_oracle user, that's the name credentials. And this is like primary database standby redo log files, SRLs. So we'll be going with the default option, use Oracle managed files for standby redo log files, right? Click on next. At this stage, we have to give the database location for the standby server. We can see that the primary database is dev, primary host is dev.dbagenesis.com, standby database attributes. what is the instance name you want to give. Now most of the times people choose different instance name for the standby, but I prefer to keep it same as the primary. You can read it. The instance name, also referred to as the SID, must be unique on the standby host. It is not saying that it should be unique in your environment. It is saying it must be unique on the standby server itself. On the standby server, we don't have any other database, so we can choose to have the same instance name as the primary. So the instance names are same both on primary and the standby. Database storage will be on file system. Standby database location. So standby database is on the standby host. We have to change this one. It is not on the dev server. So I will select where I want to create the standby. Select the stb.dbgenesis.com. Oracle home is by default same as primary, but in case if your Oracle home is different, you can give the Oracle home location over here. Standby host credentials. Go to the name credential. Okay, it's already there, right? stb Oracle user. We had created this user while adding the agent, right? Click on next. On the file locations, like standby database file locations, what we are going to choose is use Oracle optimal flexible architecture compliant directory structure. We have OFA option, or you can select this option, keep file names and location the same as the primary database. I think this is more convenient. The listener configuration, this is on the standby database, guys, on the standby server. You can see standby host is stb.dbgenesis.com. So on the standby server, guys, like this one, I have not configured any listener. Even listener will be configured by OEM for us. We don't have to worry. I just installed the Oracle 12c software. That's it. Nothing else. So I want OEM to create a listener for me. So just type listener name, listener, port number, I'll choose 1521. And if this listener does not exist, don't worry. OEM will create one for us. Click on next. Alright guys, in case if you see this error, you can just ignore this one. Click on continue. Now standby database parameters. What is the database unique name? Used to set the standby database DB unique name parameter, which must be unique within the enterprise. In your complete enterprise, you have to give a unique name. I would choose to give it as dev_st. That means it is the dev server standby database. And the target name, the display name used by enterprise manager for standby database. So within OEM, what name do you want to give to this standby database? It should be dev_st. That's a good one, right? We'll keep the unique name and the target name same. Next is standby archive locations. It's all fine. FRA area, it's in MB, so I'll give it as 10,000. That way it becomes 10 GB, right? Automatically delete applied archive redo log files when space is needed. This is important option. Next is use data guard broker. Make sure you have this checked, guys, because OEM uses data guard broker in order to manage your standby setup. So if you want to perform a failover, switch over, everything will be taken care by data guard broker. But ultimately, OEM uses data guard broker to perform those actions on the target servers. Click on next, and I think we are good to perform the standby setup. Once again, you get this warning. It just says that the following files already exist and it will be overwritten. That's perfectly fine. Click on continue. Let us review the summary. The target name is dev, database name is dev, instance name is dev, which is running on dev.dbgenesis.com, and I am performing a standby database setup. So over here, the standby name would be dev_st, but the database name is same as the source. Can you see dev? The instance name is also same as dev, right? Oracle server version 12.2.01, and this will be created on which server? stb.dbgenesis.com, right? It's a physical standby setup. Database unique name is dev_st and everything is fine. Click on finish, and now OEM should start configuring physical standby for you on the standby server. Can you see? It says the standby database creation job has been submitted. Click on view job to look at the details as to what OEM is cooking inside. The best idea is, guys, I actually choose to go with the classic view. Click on the switch to classic view, and over here you can see what exactly is happening inside OEM. You can quickly keep on refreshing, and it says this option is running. I'll choose this one. Source validation, it is trying to validate the source. Click on running to look at what is happening inside. We can see it's waiting for the output log. We'll choose this option. Still waiting. Let us go back. It takes a little time for the agent software to reflect what's happening on the targets onto the OEM. So we'll just have to wait for some time. All right, we can see that source validation is completed. You can select this option, and we can see that no output for this step. That's fine. Let's go back, and we can also see that source preparation is completed. Click on this option, and it should show you what exactly it was trying to prepare. Go back, and then I think we are seeing that destination preparation is going on. Over here we can see that transfer initialization files. You can click on this option, initialization transfer files, then transfer password files. This is also done, and currently we can see that destination preparation, it's running. Let's go and look into it, what's happening. We can see that it's preparing to configure the listener. That's good. We see that it's starting the target instance, and probably now OEM will start performing the cloning. All right, meanwhile, let's go back and see what's happening. We can see duplicate database step is running. Click on this running option, and we'll have to wait for the output. Let us click on this 30 seconds refresh, and we'll wait for OEM to give us some output on duplicate database. All right, we can see that Armin has started and Armin cloning is running. Also, let us look at, okay, it says recovery manager completed. Okay, we see that this step is completed, right? Let's go back. All right, we see that OEM has completed all these steps in configuring the physical standby, right? But we still see the status as running. We'll wait for some more time, guys, until the status shows as completed, because OEM will need to bounce the standby database and then also start the MRP process. We'll have to wait for some more time until the status shows as completed. All right, guys, we can see that now the status is succeeded, and for a very simple small test database, it took 8 minutes and 42 seconds for OEM to configure a physical standby. And what we have done, I think we just provided the input details of the target server, and OEM took over all the headache of performing the cloning, setting up the physical standby, also starting up the MRP process. Our job now is to log into the physical standby and check and also verify whether the data guard setup is perfectly fine or not. Let's clear the screen. I'm on to the standby server. Let's clear once again SQL plus /assistdba. All right, it says connected to idle instance. I think I need to export the correct SID, env grep aura. Okay, the Oracle SID is set to prod. What I'll do is I'll export Oracle underscore SID equal to def, right? Also, guys, if we check the ps-ef grep pmon, we see that dev instance is already running, but this is on the standby server. Be very careful. In our case, the pmon that is running on the, this pmon running on the dev server is also dev, And over here also we have the dev SIDP1, but both are running on different servers. Be very careful. Now let us get into SQL Plus /SSDBA. The first condition for a physical standby is it will be in mount mode. So let us select name comma open underscore mode from $database. We can see this is in mounted state. Also guys, on our support website we have a great article about physical standby setup. So I'll just open this article and show you the different queries to verify whether we have set up a physical standby or not. You can see Oracle Data Guard physical standby configuration. Open this article and scroll down to, okay, this is build standby, scroll down, verify standby configuration. You can see on standby, start MRP command. I think MRP is already running. We will check it in some time. You can also run these commands, but more importantly, I am interested in this command. Select process status sequence number from $manage standby. Let us run this over here and we can see MRP is applying log number 9. What I'll do is go to the dev server. Let's get into the database and I want to check which archive log number is running. So archive log list. Okay, before that, select name comma open underscore mode from $database. We see that this database is in read write mode, and archive log list, we see that 9th archive log is currently being generated, right? So let us perform a couple of log switches and see whether the generated log files are being applied on standby or not. So alter system switch log file, we'll do a couple of log switches and I'll directly go to standby, rerun this command. Can you see? Waiting for gap. It is waiting for log number 14. Run it once again, applying log number 15. Can you see? So our physical standby setup is verified. It is working perfectly fine. That was an amazing project, guys. We configured physical standby using OEM from one Linux server to another Linux server. But this project does not end over here. I want to give you an assignment, and what you guys need to do is, in your practice, when you configure the physical standby, I want you guys to perform a switchover using OEM and try to see whether OEM can help you perform the switchover. One hint I want to give you is, remember while we were configuring the physical standby, OEM uses Data Guard broker to manage your physical standby setup. That's the hint. Now that you have your physical standby setup done, I want you guys to go ahead and try to perform a switchover using Oracle Enterprise Manager. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye.